Okay. Yet another battle we've wanted to do for quite a while. And two really awesome movies that not enough people have seen. Really.
I think Seven Psychopaths got pretty high profile when the DVD came out.
But when it came out, both of them came out theatrically, they weren't noticed right away.
I remember fondly the first time I ever saw the trailer for In Bruges. I was my brother was in college and I went down there for a weekend and we saw There Will Be Blood. And the trailer was attached to it. And I had never heard of it before then, but I remember thinking, wow, that movie looks fucking awesome. And that was my introduction to In Bruges.
Well, the funny thing about it is we actually have theatrical movie posters for In Bruges, too. And it's great you've already mentioned that it's called In Bruges, because anybody that doesn't have any idea what this video is probably just looked at it in a very Dave Chappelle voice and said, "What's In Bruges?"
Admittedly, I know how to say Bruges because of Dr. Evil.
Yeah, same here. So, we're going to see what happens when a battle comes down between two of Martin McDonagh's greatest works, as Seven Psychopaths faces off against In Bruges. AJ, take it away.
Yeah, once again, these, as far as like plot and style, more or less, these movies don't really have that much in common. But Martin McDonagh, who's the writer and director of both, and obviously brought Colin Farrell back for both of them, is the link between them, I guess, because you have to link them, otherwise we'd be doing this for no reason. We're gonna start with Bruges. Bruges was a comedy, unlike a lot of people had seen in 2008. You could say it took inspiration from other things, but it kind of feels like its own thing. His brother, John Michael McDonagh, I want to say his name is, the guy that did The Guard. His movies feel a lot like his brother's movies, which are these. And Bruges came first. I think Seven Psychopaths and The Guard were the same year. The Guard might have been 2011, I don't remember. But regardless, and Martin McDonagh also won an Oscar for the Brendan Gleeson starring short Six Shooter, which was a lot like this. So much so that the DVD cover for Seven Psychopaths fucks up and just calls him Academy Award nominated. Of course, they're probably referring to the In Bruges got an original screenplay nomination. But he is an Oscar winner, technically. So, we're going to start with Bruges, which I already did, because I told you it was a comedy unlike anybody had seen in 2008. Continuing, it's a really interesting setup, because basically what the entire first half of the movie sets it up to be is two hitmen hiding out in Bruges, of all places. And one of them is, and obviously Bruges is this extremely beautiful place. But the running joke of the movie is the basically senior partner, who is Brendan Gleeson, loves it there and wants to bask in every moment and gets the tour book and does everything. And is just as touristy as he can possibly be. Like an American in L.A. is how Brendan Gleeson is in Bruges. And you have Colin Farrell, who basically does not want to be there, who hates everything, and constantly refers to Bruges as a shithole. You literally, because of Colin Farrell's performance in this movie, I guarantee anybody that's seen this movie, you cannot bring up Bruges around them at all without them saying the word shithole.
And vice versa.
So, yeah.
Because I've done it numerous times.
Yeah, somebody will say shithole and you'll go, oh, like Bruges. And they are Ray and Ken. Ray is Farrell and Ken is Gleeson. And for a while, that seems to be all the movie is. We know something went off because of Farrell's narration at the beginning, where he talks about he killed somebody and he threw his gun in the Thames, and then Harry said, "Get your fucking asses to Bruges." And he said, "I didn't even know where Bruges fucking was. It's in Belgium." That's like the extent of the whole narration.
Yeah.
And then the very first line of the movie after that, over a black screen, is Bruce is a shithole. And then they just wander around. I've got to say, one of the great things about this movie is, I I'm going to tell you right now. If you're watching this video, you probably don't care, but I'm just going to throw this out anyway just in case. Maybe somebody's going, oh, I want to learn more about these movies because I haven't seen them, and I am offended by extremely foul language. I'm just going to throw this out there now. I'm most likely going to be speaking in the quotes of the movie, which may not necessarily mean that's the way I talk in my real life. But I'm going to be quoting the movie, more or less. I'm mainly talking about Ray Fiennes as Harry, but we'll get there in a minute. I want to talk about a comment that is on the back of this DVD case, where David Anson from Newsweek said it's refreshingly un-PC.
Yeah, to say the least.
I remember seeing that comment when I first, because I didn't see it in the theater. I rented it when it came out on DVD, and I saw that comment before I watched it. And I was curious what he meant by that. This movie does not hold back and doesn't care who it offends.
Nope.
It offends everybody. It offends races, it offends little people, it offends Americans, and it offends anybody who doesn't like the word cunt. But of course, that's a little different there than it is here.
Yeah. So
you have to take that in mind. Just like the difference between twat and twat. So anyway, what the plot of the movie actually ends up being is obviously Ray has something on his shoulder that's a mystery. Apparently something really went wrong at this hit. But it's not until really halfway through the movie that we learn what that was. What it is he's in a confession booth and he's confessing to a murder. And in a nice little cameo, Ciarán Hinds is the priest. And in a twist of fate, the murder that Ray is confessing to is the murder he's about to commit of the priest. So he shoots the priest up, and in this hullabaloo accidentally shoots a little kid in the back of the head. Not to say this movie has a flaw. I'm just saying I've always wondered how that scene played out, because the way the kid is and where the shots came from, I've never understood how that worked, but the kid was horrifically killed in this accident.
Yeah.
And in a bit of irony, the kid was shot while reading over his confession notes, because he was getting ready to go in the confession booth. And that's what has... And Ray is, really, really broken up by this. Colin Farrell's performance in this movie is fucking incredible. It's a good accomplishment. He won the Golden Globe. I wish I could say more than that. Unfortunately, he was snubbed at the Oscars. But the problem with that, if you look at, is 2008 was a great year for movies. Yeah. And the 2008 Oscars almost completely 100% dropped the ball in all aspects of the 2008 Oscars. And I think that's why In Bruges only got one nomination, which was for screenplay. But at least that happened. So, then while Ray is off, Ray is really, really broken up by this, and sometimes just has to go lay down and cry over it. Because the guilt just eats away at him. And that's probably why he's so bitter about being there, too. Then, Ray's also probably just an asshole, too. Both are, probably feeding off each other. But then, about halfway through, Ken gets a call from Harry. And we learn that what all this is leading to is, because of this, and mainly because Harry has these absolute principles. And it's also not only because he fucked up the job, but also because he killed a kid in general. Harry wants Ray killed. And the reason he and Ken have been put in Bruges is so Ken can do it himself. And the problem is that Ken owes Harry, because way back in the 70s, when they were teenagers or in their early 20s, Ken's wife was murdered. And raped, I think. And Harry was the one that found the guy and killed him. So after all this time, Ken still owes Harry for that. So this is basically how he's supposed to pay him back. There's a deleted scene on the DVD that shows this happen. And it's it's funny because it shows how extreme Harry is as a character. But at the same time, I'm glad it was taken out because it was a little too, even for this movie, it was a little too over the top. The deleted scene is you have young Ken and you have young Harry. And you have the tragedy that has happened. And Harry gets a machete, I think is what it is. And it's also a really not very good effect. I think that's another reason it was deleted. So Harry goes in to find the guy that killed Ken's wife. And he walks into this store where he is. And he's like, he basically says, like, are you the guy? And when he realizes this is the guy, no other words are said. He whips out the machete and cuts the guy's head off and walks out. Like I said, it's good to show how extreme Harry is as a character. But at the same time, I think even for this movie, it would have been too much. So it's good. I like the mystery of, we don't know what Harry did. We just know that Harry got the guy that did it. And that's why Ken owes him a favor. And Brendan Gleeson is phenomenal in this as well. And you can see how he starts off the movie really happy. He's like the one that's trying to get joy out of this whole thing. But then once he learns why he's really there, you can see he becomes less and less jovial. And then by the end, Ken's story is obviously ends tragically, unfortunately. As does all three of them, but we'll get there as we continue this. This movie, another great thing about it is how endlessly quotable it is, which is really great. It's always great when you can find another person that knows In Bruges quotes, because you could talk to the person all day. Some of my favorites, obviously, are they build up to it during Ray's first breakdown, when we learn a lot about his guilt, when he has the whole, the lollipop man scene. When they're talking about how, you're not allowed to beat up a woman unless, you shouldn't hit a woman unless she's going to come at you with a weapon like a bottle or something. And then later on in the movie, he and the girl that plays Fleur in Goblet of Fire. Yeah, Fleur, Mad-Eye Moody, and Voldemort are all in this movie. They're at dinner, and next to them are these Canadians. This whole scene is quotable, but it's all the build up to that one big payoff. She leaves the table, and the Canadians don't like that Ray is smoking, and he makes a comment at them, and then a verbal fight starts to break out, and he brings up the Vietnamese, and they're like, I don't even know what that means, and his backup to that is, the Vietnamese. Just because you keep saying it doesn't give it any more meaning. And then a physical fight breaks out. And he knocks the guy out. And he's not going to touch the woman. But then the woman takes a wine bottle and swings it at him. And his response is, a bottle? And he punches her in the face. Which comes back to bite him at the end of the movie. Cost him his life, actually, when you think about it. That's a really dark way to look at that scene now. So, yeah, later on he's on the train, and he's getting ready to leave Bruges by himself, and Ken's basically going to face the music when Harry shows up. But he gets pulled off the train because the Canadians rat him out. Because the guy says, did you heed the Canadian? No, I did not heed the Canadian. And then we look back, and there's the Canadians from the restaurant with their bruised faces, and the guy's like, that's the motherfucker! So he gets kicked off the train, and he has to stay in Bruges. And that's when he has his final breakdown. He keeps talking about all the horrible things in his life. And it all comes down to, and the worst part of it is that I'm in fucking Bruges. And then finally, just as he's getting ready, Ken's going to let him leave and face the music. He goes through all the bad shit that's happened in the movie. And it ends with, and I'm still in fucking Bruges. He's like on the verge of tears because he's still in Bruges. And his one attempt at escape fucked him over because of the Canadians. Another great scene is the scene with the Americans. Because this is the one movie where I don't mind that Americans are seen as just fat, lazy people. And there's a great... You can barely hear it. I don't know how many people even catch it, but... The great thing is, you remember at the end of the movie when Harry and Ken are walking and they're going up, their plan is to go up to the tower, but the guard stops them and says the tower's closed. Well, at the beginning of the movie, you have this big fat guy who's already out of breath before he even gets to the tower. I also love the opening to that scene too, where he's Ray is down here because he doesn't want to go up to the tower because Ken says, "Let's go up to the top of the tower," and he's like, "Why? What's up there?" And he's like, "The view is up there," and he's like, "Well, it's the view from down here. I can see down here from down here." So he stays down there, and these Americans are getting ready to go up there, and he basically comments about how they're not going to be able to do it. And then when they don't get the point, he says, "You're a bunch of fucking elephants." And there's this hilarious scene where he basically runs in a circle, and the guy chases him until he runs out of breath, which is only for a few seconds it takes. At the end of the movie, of course, the reason the tower is closed and Harry and Ken can't get up there is because an American had a heart attack on his way up the steps and died. Presumably that guy that Ray warned. But alas, he didn't believe it because he was American, and that's what happened. He paid the ultimate price for it. There's another character we haven't talked about yet. Jimmy. Jimmy is a dwarf actor played by Jordan Prentice. And he's not so much an actor so much as he's an extra in a dream sequence for a movie that happens to be shooting in Bruges at the time. I think that's all Jimmy's supposed to be doing in the movie. At one point, he's dressed as a schoolboy and gets laughed at by Ray for it. And we're introduced to that because Ray uses the one word that I understand they hate the most. And he uses it through the whole movie because this movie throws PC out the window immediately. One of the most quoted lines from this movie is, "What's going on in the streets? They're filming something. They're filming midgets." And out of everything in Bruges, did he absolutely just not care about at all, this has him on the edge of his seat, literally. He is bent over watching this shoot happen with all the focus that he has. And then the great scene where he sees Jimmy is on a horse tranquilizer and he walks by. And this excites Ray so much. Ray's reaction to seeing Jimmy walk by is... And Jimmy doesn't wave at him. He just keeps walking. And Ray just puts his hand away and goes, "What a fucking cunt." And then the great scene, it's just this great whole segment. And this happens if you watch the episode where Colin Farrell hosted Saturday Night Live. Colin Farrell has this magnificent talent where he can talk really fast without screwing up. There's this whole segment he did for Saturday Night Live where he owned a slack store. And all of his lines were really long tongue twisters that he said really fast, and he never fucked up. Perfect for Colin Farrell. There's a scene where Ray's on cocaine. And naturally he runs into Jimmy again while he's on cocaine. And I just love the way he walks up to him, and he doesn't say, "Hey, remember me?" He walks up and he jabs him in the back of the head to get his attention. And says, "Why didn't you?" He's really deeply offended. This is like all he's got. "Why didn't you wave hello to me today when I waved hello to you today?" And that's when Jimmy says, "I was on a horse tranquilizer. I wasn't waving to anybody except maybe a horse." And that's one of the great lines of the movie. "You two are weird. Would you like some cocaine?" And Ken has a great moment there too when they're basically trying to intimidate Jimmy, so Ken just comes up behind Ray and just stands there and stares at them. And then the great, once again, offensive scene where they go back to Jimmy's place and they do drugs, and Jimmy goes on this big conspiracy about how one of these days, it doesn't matter, where you're from or how you were raised, there's going to be a big war between the blacks and the whites. And Ray's trying to stump this theory by saying, what about the others? Like, what about the Vietnamese or the Japanese and so on? And he's like, what do they fall under, the blacks or the whites? And of course, Jimmy is very close-minded. Everybody that's not white falls under the blacks. This, of course, ends with Ray stealing Jimmy's drugs and karate chopping him in the neck. Even at this movie's most ridiculous, it's still brilliant in a way. Because it perfectly captures that kind of comedy. talking about all the great scenes in this movie, we haven't even talked about Harry's appearance yet. Ralph Fiennes in this movie, I'm going to tell you something now. Sorry if you don't agree. I know this is. I know from the people that I know personally, this is a controversial opinion. In 2008, when In Bruges came out, Heath Ledger won the Oscar for The Dark Knight for supporting actor. If Ralph Fiennes had been running, he would have been my personal choice, I think. As much as I love Ledger in The Dark Knight, the best performance by a supporting actor in 2008 was Ralph Fiennes in Bruges. Harry Waters is this magnificent psychopath brought perfectly to life by Fiennes. We just talked about, when we talked about the Grand Budapest Hotel, how much range he has. He has his greatness of comedy and delivery that he has in the Grand Budapest Hotel, with the psychotic tendencies of somebody. I won't go as far as to say the character in Schindler's List, because Harry has principles. And Harry, you know, like... Let's go to that ending before we talk about his other scenes. Obviously, Harry's downfall is he goes to the weapons dealer and buys the gun. He buys the bullets that can make heads explode, which is ultimately his doing. Because at the end, when he's confronting Ken and he's telling Ken why Ray has to die. And he talks about how, obviously, Harry, despite the way he is, has a wife and children. And even if that wife might be an inanimate object, he's very sorry for calling her that. And he's very close with his kids and tells them, you know, I'm going to go away, but, you know, I'll be back and all that. That's a bummer, but... So Harry very much means what he says, and we learn that because... And there's an admirable quality to that, because even though he's a really bad guy, he absolutely sticks to what he says, because he tells Ken the reason Ray has to die is because he killed a kid. And no matter the circumstances, that's just something you don't do. And he even says the words, if I had killed a kid, I would have shot myself on the spot. Well, naturally, he's chasing Ray at the end and practically killing him. That one bullet he used on himself was probably the last one he had. Well, the problem was he was shooting. Ray was running to get away, and he ended up on the movie set where Jimmy was. And the bullets were going through Ray as he was shooting him, because he shot him like 6 times. Well, apparently one of those bullets went through Ray, hit Jimmy in the head, and blew Jimmy's head up. So when Harry looks down, all he sees is a tiny body with no head, and thinks he's killed a kid.
Oh.
And that's why Harry kills himself. He says the line, "Gotta stick to your principles." That's his last line before he offs himself. So Harry's also a really deep character, despite the fact that he's probably Ray is up there, but Harry might be the funniest character in the movie. No, maybe Ray is, but they're right there, okay? So when Fiennes enters this movie from when he exits it, which is the very last scene of the movie, he just owns this movie. Gleason and, Gleason still has a really good scene, but Gleason and Farrell more or less take a back seat, and Fiennes fucking owns this thing for the last third of it. When he just charges through the city with absolute business on his mind, and nothing's going to stop this. And nothing does. And he confronts Ken at that table, and they go through that whole dialogue. One of my personal favorite moments in the movie is when he's talking about, he says, Ken's finally saying why he won't do it, and he says, you know, I gotta, as much as I hate to do it, I've gotta say, fuck you, Harry, and I gotta say, fuck what I owe you, and I gotta say, fuck your wife, and fuck your kids, and just fuck everything you stand for. And then he says, you're saying, fuck my kids, that's going overboard, you retract that. I can't say the line without laughing. He says, your wife's a cunt and your kids are cunts. And Harry's line is, you retract that bit about my fucking cunt kids. I just love the way he backs it up with, that's going overboard. And then of course, the great... It starts off hilarious and then just goes horribly dramatic in a flash of a second. The tragic scene where Ken and Harry go up the tower. And it starts off with, that's when Ken says the fuck you and fuck what I owe you speech. And that's when he says, you're just going to have to shoot me. And Harry says, okay, and shoots him in the leg. He's like, I'm not just going to fucking stand here. Like Robert fucking Paladin, fucking Jesus of fucking Nazareth. And the scene's perfectly fine till then. And then that's when he gets word that the guy that Ray shot in the face with blanks is the guy that was there when Harry got weapons. So the guy knows that Harry wants Ray. So when the guy sees him, he goes to the tower and tells Harry about it. And that's when Harry and Ken get into the fatal scuffle. This is when it takes the tragic turn just out of nowhere when Ken gets shot in the throat. So much so that you know he's probably done for. So Harry just leaves him for dead and chases after Ray. And there's this beautiful scene where Ken decides he's gonna die, so he's gonna make the most out of this death. So he goes. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out, but I think his plan was to put his gun in his coat so that when he landed on the ground, Ray could use his gun. That was the plan. Well, Ken goes up there, on Raglan Road is the name of the song, and he goes, and it's this beautiful scene where he drops coins on the ground so he can get attention. So I guess Ray knows to look for him, and so he can warn people that he's coming, I guess. And he jumps off the building, and it's this fucking gruesome scene when he hits the ground. And Ray realizes who it is and goes over and finds him. And he's like, take my gun. And the gun did not make it through this fall. Just in all this tragedy, you had to throw that little funny moment in. And then there's the haunting line where Ray says, I don't know what to do. And Ken says, I think I'm going to die now. And he just does. And he's left alone with Harry. And Harry chases him through Bruges, shooting at him, and that's when we get to the big ending. In the middle of this, once again, all this horrible tragedy has happened. And you have this scene where they run into the hotel. And Fonz is at the bottom of the stairs, and Ray's at the top of the stairs. And they're basically doing the, we're going to count to 3, and that's when we're going to run. Like, you're going to go out the window, you're going to go that way, I'm going to go this way, on 3. And then there's silence. And then Ray says, are you counting? And Ray says, I thought you were the one counting. And then, of course, you know the movie is not turning back. Obviously, it already took a tragic point of no return when Ken is dead now in the most horrible way. Ray manages to escape out the window and get on the boat. And Harry finds out where he's escaped and is in the window. And Ray's getting away on this boat. And Ray's saying to himself, you know, I'm too far away, he can't hit me from here. And with one shot, Harry gets him in the stomach. And that pretty much takes Ray out of the rest of the movie. He basically stumbles through the rest of the movie until the final moments where everybody loves their theories. The last lines of the movie are, we're seeing things from Ray's perspective, and he says, oh my god, I'm going to fucking die in Bruges. And they're loading him onto the ambulance, and the last line of the movie is, I really, really hoped that I wouldn't die, in past tense. I always assumed this, but I guess everybody loves a happy ending. Everybody wanted to, not that this movie at this point can have a happy ending anymore, but everybody wanted to believe that Ray didn't die, but Martin McDonagh himself apparently confirmed that Ray, speaking in the past tense when he said, I hoped I wouldn't die, means that he did. So, just one of the funniest movies to come out in a long time is also one of the most tragic and depressing. Yeah. And that's quite an accomplishment. That's just, and it's so perfectly balanced like that. Like, even normally, in a normal movie that didn't necessarily have a hold of itself, once you get to the moment where Ken dies, I would say, the movie would just be dark and bleak for the rest of it. But throwing in that last comedy bit at the hotel, just the way it still has generally the balls to do that. That's why In Bruges is so beloved as it is. It's another movie that I consider probably a flawless movie. And probably one of my favorites. But that's not to say anything bad about Seven Psychopaths, which was his follow-up, which a lot of people, usually the unanimous decision is it had a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
Seven Psychopaths is more of is more story related than regarding the I guess the colorful side characters. I mean, it's got colorful side characters in it, but it's more story driven than Bruges is. Because Bruges' plot kind of like unfolds as it goes, and it doesn't really have a place to go unless, you know, the next scene directs it that way, is the way Bruges works. This is a pretty straightforward story where it's Colin Farrell plays, a lot of people, I guess, that didn't like the movie thought this was a little too self-conscious and obvious, but obviously Martin McDonagh wrote this movie and also directed it. The main character of the movie is a screenwriter named Marty. And he's writing a script called Seven Psychopaths, but the only thing he has is a title. He doesn't know what to do. And he has a couple of stories, but he doesn't know what to do with them or how to end them. And he's got a friend named Billy who's off his rocker, who is Sam Rockwell. And Sam Rockwell is friends with Hans, who is Christopher Walken. And basically what Billy and Hans do is they kidnap dogs, and they keep them for a couple of days until there's a huge cash reward for them. And then they conveniently return them to their owner and take the money. And they look like heroes for finding the dog. The trouble is that they steal a Shih Tzu one day named Bonnie, and Bonnie belongs to Charlie, who is Woody Harrelson, who is a vicious gangster. And all hell breaks loose. And as all this insanity is happening, Marty finds inspiration for his story. And we get to see the stories within stories. Like, one of the psychopaths is a Quaker played by Harry Dean Stanton. And it becomes like a heaven and hell kind of thing, which is an interesting movie in itself. It makes a good short movie. So you could tell this is a guy that won an Oscar for making a short film. And there's also a side plot with the Jack of Diamonds killer, which... obviously, like I said, we're very spoilery when we do this because we go from beginning to end. Obviously, it's revealed that Billy is the Jack of Diamonds killer. And his introduction is fantastic. It's the very first scene of the movie. Because we have no idea how it connects. Well, the thing is when they're introduced, they're numbered. Like, somebody will do something fucking crazy, and then it'll say psychopath number whatever. The very first scene of this movie is... two hitmen on a job played by Michael Stuhlbarg and Michael Pitt. The Boardwalk Empire Michaels. And they're standing in this wide open space. And they're talking about random hits that they've done. They're talking about things that go through a person's eyes or whatever. And they're just dialoguing to each other. And as this segment goes on, there's this big sidewalk behind them. And they're facing this way. And as the whole scene is going on, they're just talking, minding their own business. We see the Jack of Diamonds killer coming at them from the sidewalk. And as they're continuing to talk and get further into their conversation, he's just getting closer and closer as this scene happens. And then he just plugs them both in the back of the head at the same time. And leaves his calling card, which is the Jack of Diamonds, and it says Psychopath number 1. And the song The First Cut of the Deepest is used really well in this movie. It's used a few times. It's the opening song and the closing song. I think it's in there one more time. Because basically Billy is so obsessed with this idea that he basically decided to become a serial killer. It's worth noting that they only say this a couple of times. I think Tom Waits says it once. Billy's last name is Bickle, which is a not-so-subtle-at-all reference to people with psychotic tendencies that don't know any better. And the interesting thing they bring about Tom Waits in this movie, he only has 2 scenes, unfortunately. Technically 3. He comes about because it's just, and it's just kind of a... Technically, as much as I hate to say it, it's kind of a worthless scene. Like, there's pretty much no reason for it to be there, because it doesn't really come back in any way, except for the after the credits scene, but that doesn't even amount to anything. But And it's still a good scene, though, because it's this whole big segment where Billy decides that he's going to help. The one thing Billy wants to do more than anything is to help Marty write his script. He wants so badly to be a part of this. So he thinks, I'm going to help Marty get into the view of psychopaths by putting a wanted ad in the newspaper. Wanted psychopaths for interview. And Tom Waits shows up at his door holding a rabbit. And Tom Waits has this whole backstory about how he and his former love went on a Bonnie and Clyde-esque killing spree, killing notorious serial killers. Up to and including the Zodiac Killer. In really graphic, gruesome ways, too. This movie is very, very graphic and bloody. More so than Bruges, and Bruges was pretty bloody, too. But it's a lot more of a comedy than Bruges. It has its tragic elements, but it's definitely at the front a comedy. A couple of the more tragic scenes, there's one particular scene that plays out in the middle of the movie where Hans has a wife that's sick in the hospital that he visits every day. And he brings her flowers, and they, have these nice little moments, and they're just enjoying the last minutes of their life together. Or the last whatever time they have together. Yes, in movie time it's minutes. But then they find, Woody Harrelson finds out that is Hans's wife, and that Hans is responsible for taking Bonnie. So Charlie pays a visit to Hans's wife, and it's this big scene where it's this really tense scene, too, where Woody Harrelson is basically pacing around the room and looking for Hans. And Hans is on his way there. But she's next to an empty bed, and he knows he's looking for Hans's wife, and Hans's wife says that she's not here, and that he's not here either, and pretends to be somebody that's not Hans's wife. But throughout the scene, we realize that Charlie knows. Like, the scene where the little thing where he gets in the wheelchair and rolls up to her and is just kind of reclining. Like, we know he's just kind of testing how long it's going to take her to break. And then he manages to shoot her in the back of the head right before Hans gets there. That scene where he passes Hans in the hallway, and as soon as Hans lays eyes on him, he knows what's happened. So he doesn't go to the room right away, he goes out the exit. And then the heartbreaking scene where he went back to the room and now he's holding her after he's found her. The whole Hans story is extremely tragic, especially his death scene at the end, which once again started as a comedy scene with the put your hands up. No. I don't care that you have a shotgun. So, and then of course, the whole Billy story takes a tragic turn. But then again, there's the whole they make it sad. They kind of work really hard to make it sad because Billy has the whole running joke where he wants Bonnie to give him Paul, and Bonnie never gives him Paul. And then finally at the end, after the fight is broken out and Marty's made it out safe and the flare gun is out, Charlie just shoots Billy point blank in the head. But I guess in a certain place where Billy doesn't die instantly, Billy lives long enough for Bonnie to give him Paul right before he dies. But despite those tragic elements, this one is a lot more of a comedy than Bruges is. And it's got Rockwell is the main star of this. Obviously Colin Farrell's the main star, but I mean Rockwell is the glue that holds this movie together. Rockwell is Oscar-worthy in this movie. There's one particular scene that really stood out that really made me think about his character, where he wants to be accepted, but he doesn't care about. Colin Farrell has a girlfriend played by Abby Cornish that he really doesn't like, and she doesn't like him. And basically, he's about to go to this party to basically hang out with Marty and annoy her. But as he's getting dressed and talking in the mirror, like Travis Bickle, he's basically prepping himself for this party and how he's going to be towards other people. The look on Rockwell's face, for some reason, when Billy is prepping for this party, he looks like he's going to cry. and I've always wondered that about his character, like what's going through his character's head, because Sam Rockwell knows what he's doing when it comes to acting. This isn't just some random thing. I think Rockwell probably had a whole backstory of this guy in his head while he was performing. And I'd love to know more about that, because Billy is a really enigmatic character. The great scene where we find out that he's banging Olga Kurylenko, and her only scene, despite the fact that she gets a major credit. And we learn that she is Charlie's girlfriend. And that's the scene where we learn he's the Jack of Diamonds killer, when he just ups and shoots her dead when he finds out that she's Charlie's girlfriend. when he's talking about not using the condom, and he says, well, it could be worse. You could have, it's not like it's chlamydia or something. And then she walks away angry, and he's like, what did I say? And then suddenly he's got his pants back on, and he's sitting on the couch, and he's eating cheese puffs, and he's like, hey, did you hear me? I said it's not like it's chlamydia or something. And then I can't remember what else it is. There's another scene like that that's really funny where he repeats himself. Oh, it's, Marty made a fool out of himself at the party. He got drunk and basically pissed off Abby Cornish, and she got mad and left. And, he says, it's that way he has it of, he's repeating what he was asked to repeat in the exact same way he just said it. Because he's eating, like, jelly on toast, and he's in Marty's house, though. And he says, why is she so mad at me? And he's like, why don't you call her up and find out? And he's like, what? Why don't you call her up and find out? He just repeats it in exactly the same way he just said it, so he hears it. And his fascination with the Yakuza. Everything that Sam Rockwell does in this movie is gold. And he should have... It was really nice to see him get an Independent Spirit Award nomination, but I wish he had gotten more. But I knew that was out of the realm of possibility, because this wasn't really a critical favorite. Some critics stuck to it, but for the most part, most people just went to the whole, it didn't live up to Bruges, so fuck it. Another one of my favorite moments is the ending when they're waiting for the standoff with Charlie in the desert. And they're basically just waiting it out. And then finally, because Billy blows up the car and then says, I told them to look for the burning car. So he's basically called Charlie and told them to come and get them. And while they're waiting for it, he says, this is like that window of time when you're in the waiting room of the VD clinic and you're waiting for the doctor to come out to say, Billy, you're good to go. Or Billy, you've got VD. His deliveries are perfect every time. And speaking of Rockwell's deliveries, let's talk about what's probably the most beloved scene of this movie. Once again, Billy's biggest thing in life is he wants to help Marty write the script. So Billy comes up with a big action movie ending to the script. And he decides he's going to read it to Hans and Marty to get their opinions on it. And it's this big, gigantic action scene that we get to see play out as he narrates it. That involves the everybody in the movie coming back, and it's this big shootout where everybody gets blown away. And it's really funny because it also shows up. He talks about Abby, obviously his hatred for her comes out, and a big portion of this is Abby Cornish getting gunned down. So he's like, she's getting mown down. And he's just killing her as hard as he can in this story so Marty can avenge her death. It's worth noting there, my brother actually pointed this out to me. It's funny that they pointed out, I think Marty specifically points out, or it might be Abby Cornish that points it. No, it's Abby Cornish points it out at the party. She says a lot of the scripts underwrite the women. And the funny thing about that is the two women in this movie are extremely underwritten. And Olga Kurylenko has one scene and then she's shot dead. Abby Cornish has like two scenes where she's a bitch. And then one scene where not only is she being shot dead, but she's wearing a see-through white t-shirt and it's raining. The great thing about Hans pops out of the grave with the two guns, and Woody Harrelson gets shot through the throat with an arrow. But that's not it. There's also a shotgun, and then Woody Harrelson's head just explodes completely. Everybody loves that scene, whether they hate the movie or not. And I don't know why, it's always this little moment that I've loved where there's like a can of beer behind Billy when he's telling the story, and when he gets really into it, he throws himself back into it, and the beer kind of tips over and spills out, and you just see it spilling out over Billy's shoulder through the rest of the scene. So yeah, there's plenty of things to love about Seven Psychopaths. And it's, like I said, it's a lot more of a comedy. And I also love the twist in the story where the Quaker that played by Harry Dean Stanton actually ends up being Hans, and it was his daughter and his wife and so on. So Seven Psychopaths has those moments where it can go deep, but maybe not necessarily reach the heights of Bruges or anything. And maybe some people do see it as it tried to reach Bruges' heights and just couldn't. But in this one, like I said, I will gladly defend Seven Psychopaths, but Bruges is one of my all-time favorite movies. Like, I don't know, top 25, I guess. And I've seen so many movies, that's a really good place to be. And Seven Psychopaths is just a really, really good movie to me. So, yes, I would say In Bruges is a masterpiece, though. That probably, I don't think McDonagh will most likely have a long career, but that's going to be really hard to top. But it'll be very interesting to see what his next thing is.
Most definitely. Okay, so next week, we're going to see what's out there in the atmosphere way up in the sky. Nice little battle between two very interesting movies. So that's going to be your video for today and your verses for this week. So AJ, any parting words?
That's it.